They say everyone has a breaking point, a moment when love twists into fury, when patience gives way to obsession, and even the calmest soul becomes capable of the unthinkable. No one plans to cross that line. It creeps in, slow and gradual, like a candle burning to its very end, leaving only smoke and a heavy darkness behind. Maya Lockhart was no exception. She wasn't impulsive or dangerous. She was a woman who believed in love, trust, and the beauty of shared dreams. Yet, she became the kind of headline no one ever expects to read. He made her feel like she was his everything, only to strip everything from her. What drives someone from waiting for justice to becoming it themselves? This story isn't one where the sides are clear. It's messy, unsettling, and by the end, you might find yourself questioning what you would have done. Some called her a victim. Others a monster. But the truth? That's where things get complicated. Forgiveness isn't for everyone, and not every story ends in silence. Welcome to Crime Wave Stories HQ. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories update. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Maya Lockhart was no stranger to resilience. She was a nurse who carefully built her life one shift at a time, dedicating herself to the care of others, often at the expense of her own needs. Beneath her calm professionalism and composed demeanor was a woman carrying her own invisible weight. Her life story wasn't just one of achievements. It was a tale of survival. After enduring a divorce that left her questioning her self-worth, she chose to pour her energy into her work. Night after night, she poured herself into her work, spending long nights in hospital wards and early mornings comforting patients in recovery. As the years passed, her career flourished, but her personal life remained eerily quiet. It was a loneliness she didn't discuss often, though her friends gently urged her to put herself out to the world of love and relationships. Maya wasn't chasing excitement. She wanted something simple, someone with whom she could share life's quieter, more genuine moments. She wasn't naive. Maya was thoughtful and cautious, but even she knew that mending a wounded heart was a much slower process than patching a physical wound. Through years of tireless work, Maya had built up a modest but secure future. She meticulously saved her earnings, working extra shifts to ensure she could stand proudly on her own. Financially prudent though she was, her heart remained vulnerable, a truth she would soon confront. Then Ethan Reeves entered her life. To Maya, Ethan seemed like the missing piece she hadn't known she was searching for. He radiated a charisma that felt effortless, carrying himself with a modest attentiveness. Ethan had a way of making anyone feel as though they were the only person in the room, a crafty skill he uses to devastating effect. His words weren't hurried, nor were they exaggerated. Every interaction was like a seed carefully planted, nurtured by the way he moved through conversations as though they were pathways meant to lead directly to her heart. Ethan told Maya that he was a widower, a man grieving the loss of his wife to a tragic accident. He spoke of heartbreak and healing, of piecing his life back together after being shattered by love's cruel hand. He didn't lay his story out all at once. It came in fragments, each detail unveiled with the kind of care that made it feel sacred. Ethan wasn't just painting a picture. He was inviting her into it, into the life he claimed to have rebuilt from pain and hope. Maya believed him because the grief he described was familiar to her, a mirror of the pain she herself had endured. But Ethan Reeves wasn't grieving. He was hunting. From a young age, Ethan had learned that life was about staying ahead, about wielding charm like currency, and using deception as a tool. He didn't stumble into his lifestyle by accident. It was a choice, one he made without remorse. To Ethan, people weren't individuals with dreams and stories of their own. They were opportunities waiting to be exploited. His life was built on manipulation, financed by lies, and maintained through the shattered trust of countless women who had fallen for his well-rehearsed facade. Maya first came across Ethan's profile during a quiet evening at home. After a grueling shift, she sank into her couch, scrolling through her phone with her favorite playlist softly playing in the background. A post from a mutual friend had brought Ethan's profile into her feed. His profile picture wasn't ostentatious or suspicious. It was a candid image of him standing by a small lake, his soft smile framed by the muted colors of the background. She hesitated for a moment before clicking on his profile. His posts didn't scream for attention. They whispered of simplicity and peace, of life's small, often overlooked joys. There was something refreshing about the way he described himself, a kind of authenticity she hadn't encountered in years. Her finger hovered over the Add Friend button before she finally pressed it, convincing herself it was harmless. Minutes later, a notification lit up her screen. A message from Ethan. "Hi, Maya. I saw that we have a few mutual friends. Your work in nursing is incredible. It must take someone truly special to do what you do every day." It wasn't the kind of message that screamed desperation or flattery. It was respectful, direct, and intentional, designed to capture her attention without overwhelming her. Maya read the message carefully, her fingers hovering over the phone as she considered her response. She wasn't one to dive into conversations with strangers, but something about Ethan's approach felt safe. His words weren't overbearing or excessive. Instead, they carried a sincerity that was rare in her experience. She replied cautiously, offering polite answers to his questions. But Ethan didn't rush her. He didn't push the conversation in any direction she wasn't ready for. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions: why she had chosen nursing as her profession, what books she was reading, and what moments in her career had brought her the most fulfillment. Each question seemed to peel back another layer of her life, and before she realized it, she was sharing details she hadn't spoken about in years. Ethan's messages became little pockets of light in her day. Between shifts at the hospital and quiet evenings at home, she found herself checking her phone, hoping for the familiar buzz of his name lighting up her screen. His attentiveness wasn't overwhelming. It was measured, intentional, and it felt real. As their conversations deepened, Ethan revealed pieces of his own life, always in a way that felt genuine. He spoke of his late wife with a quiet reverence, describing her as his anchor, the person who had once made the chaos of life bearable. He talked about the simple joys they had shared: long walks by the sea, lazy mornings with coffee and the newspaper, and evenings filled with conversation. He painted a picture of love that felt both attainable and enviable. Each detail he revealed wasn't just a part of his story, it became part of theirs, a foundation they were seemingly building together. Maya, who had guarded her heart so carefully, found herself letting her walls down, brick by brick. The first video call was a defining moment for her. She had wondered if the warmth in his messages would translate to his voice, and when he spoke, it felt like hearing the words of an old friend, someone she had known for years but had only just met. His voice carried a steady, soothing quality, and his laughter was unforced, genuine. He didn't interrupt or dominate the conversation. Instead, he listened, truly listened, in a way that made her feel seen and valued. Ethan's vision for the future was simple, yet it mirrored what Maya had always longed for: a partner to share the little moments with, a home filled with love and understanding, and a life that didn't need grand gestures to feel fulfilling. For the first time in years, Maya felt like someone truly understood her, not just her profession or her outward accomplishments, but the essence of who she was. As the weeks turned into months, their connection deepened. Late-night calls stretched into the early hours of the morning, and their exchanges became the highlight of Maya's days. Ethan spoke of shared adventures, quiet weekends spent gardening, and the joy of waking up next to someone you love. His words painted a future that felt tangible, as though it were just within reach. Her friends began to notice a shift in her demeanor. Maya seemed lighter, happier. She hummed to herself while preparing meals, and there was a renewed brightness in her eyes. But she kept this new relationship close to her chest, a private joy she wasn't ready to share with anyone just yet. Speaking it aloud felt too risky, as though it might shatter the fragile magic of what she had found. Ethan's messages grew more intimate. He sent her photos of sunsets he said reminded him of their conversations, snapshots of his morning coffee perched on his windowsill, and blurry images of quiet moments that felt unposed, authentic. Each message, each photo, felt like another thread weaving their lives together. Maya, who had spent so many years tending to others, finally felt like someone was tending to her. But Ethan's intentions weren't born from love. They were calculated, deliberate. While Maya saw a future filled with hope, Ethan saw an opportunity, a carefully planned con, unfolding exactly as he intended. The first sign of trouble came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan mentioned in passing that his business had hit a rough patch, a shipment delayed or a contract falling through. His voice carried a note of frustration, but he didn't dwell on it. Maya, concerned but not alarmed, offered words of encouragement, assuring him that these setbacks were temporary. Then came the first request, a small loan to help him bridge the gap until his finances stabilized. Ethan's voice was steady, his tone reluctant. "I hate asking you for this," he said, "but I wouldn't if I had another option. It's just temporary, I promise." Maya hesitated. She had always been cautious with money, her savings a testament to years of hard work and sacrifice. But this was Ethan, someone who had earned her trust, who had shown her a side of herself she thought had been lost. She told herself it wasn't a big deal, just a small gesture to help someone she cared about. She transferred the money, convincing herself it was a one-time thing. But Ethan's requests didn't stop there. One small loan turned into another, then another. Each time, his stories grew more urgent: an unexpected legal fee, a delayed payment, a sudden emergency. His reassurances were unwavering. "Once this is behind us," he would say, "everything will fall into place. We'll have the life we've been dreaming of." And Maya believed him, because she wanted to believe him. Love has a way of silencing doubts, of turning whispers of suspicion into background noise. Bit by bit, her savings dwindled. At first, she barely noticed the totals. But soon, she was moving money between accounts, convincing herself it was temporary, that Ethan would pay her back, just as he said he would. 37 million. That's how much she gave him. Her future, her dreams, everything she had worked for. To her, it wasn't just money. It was trust. A belief in the life they had spoken about late into the night. But to Ethan, she was a target. Another woman who'd believed in his lies. Another stepping stone in his carefully crafted lifestyle. And when he had taken everything she had to give, he disappeared. The text stopped. The phone calls never came. Maya's messages went unanswered until, one day, her phone buzzed with a hollow silence. His number was disconnected. His social media accounts were gone. The man who had promised her the world had vanished into thin air. Maya sat alone in her dimly lit living room, clutching her phone as if it could somehow bring Ethan back or explain his sudden absence. But the screen offered nothing, just the stark silence of unanswered texts and missed calls. The weight of reality bore down on her, suffocating and unrelenting. She replayed every conversation in her mind, searching for signs she might have missed. Every smile, every kind word he'd sent her through that tiny screen now felt hollow. The man she had trusted with her heart, and her future was nothing more than a fraud. Sleep became a distant memory. Night after night, Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling as her thoughts spiraled. How could I have been so blind? How did I let this happen? The guilt gnawed at her soul, a relentless whisper reminding her that she should have known better. She began pulling away from her friends, dodging their calls and declining invitations. The thought of sharing her shame, of admitting what she had lost, felt unbearable. How could she face anyone knowing she had handed over not just her savings, but her trust? As the days blurred into weeks, her once cozy home became a prison. The four walls that had been her sanctuary now seemed to close in on her, echoing the emptiness Ethan had left behind. In her desperation, Maya decided to fight back. She gathered every scrap of evidence she could find, screenshots of messages, bank transfers, and even the photos Ethan had sent. With trembling hands and a flicker of hope, she walked into the nearest police station. The officer behind the desk barely glanced at her pile of documents. His voice was flat, almost dismissive, as he explained, "Ma'am, these cases are difficult. Scammers like this use fake names, fake accounts, and they're often overseas. Tracking them is nearly impossible. Maya's heart sank. The very system meant to protect her felt indifferent, mechanical. Filing the report felt more like an obligation than a step toward justice. Refusing to give up, she turned to the internet, determined to uncover the truth on her own. Late into the night, she searched forums, joined support groups, and scoured social media for any trace of Ethan, or whatever his real name might be. Through one of these groups, she discovered she wasn't alone. There were others, women from different walks of life, who had been deceived by the same charming smile and carefully crafted lies. Each of their stories echoed her own, promises of love, requests for help, and then, silence. But Maya wasn't content to simply commiserate. Her anger burned hotter with every shared story, every bank account emptied, every heartbroken woman left behind. She couldn't let Ethan, or whatever alias he was using, continue his trail of destruction. Maya made a decision. She would stop waiting for justice to find him. She would become it. Maya knew she couldn't face this battle unprepared. She began carefully planning her next steps, drawing on her innate resilience and a newfound determination. Every detail of her interactions with Ethan was scrutinized. Every text, every voice note, every clue he might have inadvertently left behind. She started with the photos he had sent her. At first glance, they seemed innocent enough: beaches, coffee cups, sunsets. But Maya noticed subtle details in the backgrounds. A shop sign partially obscured in one picture. A unique piece of architecture in another. Using these fragments, she began piecing together a map of his movements. Her search led her to reach out to a digital investigator she found in one of the support groups. The investigator, a woman named Susan, had a reputation for unearthing the hidden. Susan listened intently as Maya recounted her story, her tone a mixture of empathy and professional focus. "I've seen this before," Susan said. "These scammers rely on their victims feeling isolated and powerless. But if he's slipped up anywhere, I'll find it." Ethan had been careful, changing his name, deleting his old accounts, but no one disappears without leaving a trace. There were still fragments of his digital life that hadn't been erased. Social media comments that seemed innocent enough but hinted at locations. A tagged post that had slipped through his tight grip on privacy. And most of all, one detail that only became clear when someone was determined enough to follow every breadcrumb. Weeks turned into months as they mapped out his movements, tracking where he had been and where he might be now. Then, there was a breakthrough. A photo posted by an acquaintance showed a familiar silhouette in the background. It was unmistakable. Ethan Reeves standing on a beach, drink in hand, wearing designer clothes paid for with stolen dreams. The photo was taken on an exclusive island in the Maldives, a place that boasted beachfront villas, luxury restaurants, and the kind of privacy only money could buy. Maya stared at the image, her heart pounding in her chest. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was thriving. He was living extravagantly with the sweat of women who had only ever wanted to love him. He wasn't thinking about the damage he had caused. He wasn't wondering if any of the women he had scammed were okay. He didn't care if they were struggling to pay their bills or if his betrayal had led them to dark places. Maya wiped away tears as she imagined how many women had cried the same way she was crying now. Women who had been left broken, isolated, and desperate. And there Ethan was, throwing parties, surrounded by drinks and laughter, basking in a life that wasn't his to live. Her sorrow was no longer just about her own pain. It became something sharper, something harder. Ethan had taken everything from her, but she wasn't there to ask for it back. Maya had found the man who ruined her life, living in paradise funded by the misery of others. And she wasn't there to ask for an apology. Maya Lockhart arrived on the island with nothing but a small suitcase and a heart full of determination. The moment she stepped off the plane, the salty breeze felt different. Not like a welcome, but like a challenge. She wasn't here to relax or take in the tropical views. She was here for him. Dressed in simple, casual clothes, Maya blended in among the tourists, her calm exterior hiding the storm within. She checked into a modest hotel, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid suspicion. For 2 days she kept her distance, watching him from afar like a shadow. Ethan Reeves moved through life as though he were untouchable. She watched him saunter through the lobby of his beachfront villa, surrounded by people laughing at his every joke. There was no remorse in his eyes, just the smug confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted everyone. At night, the lights from his villa blazed as music and laughter poured out into the darkness. Champagne glasses clinked, and partygoers danced beneath the stars. Maya sat across the beach in silence, unseen and unnoticed. The second night, the party lasted well past midnight. Ethan stumbled home alone, his steps slow and uneven as he let out a carefree laugh at nothing in particular. He had no idea that someone was watching. Someone who wasn't there to toast his success, but to witness his fall. When the morning sun began to rise, its soft, golden rays spilled over the horizon and cast light on his villa. The air was thick with the scent of salt and early dew as Ethan groaned awake, rubbing his temples, his body weighed down by the consequences of excess. He shuffled to the door, squinting at the light that streamed through the windows. He reached for the handle without thinking, expecting nothing more than the morning air. When the door swung open, he froze. There she was, Maya Lockhart, standing tall, her face calm, but her eyes holding a depth of pain that could pierce through any facade. For a second, Ethan didn't move. His mind scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. He blinked as though hoping she'd vanish like a bad dream. When she didn't, he stammered. Who are you?" Maya's voice was steady, but cold. "You don't even remember me?" she asked, her words sharp enough to cut through the haze of his hangover. "The woman whose heart you stole. Whose life you destroyed." Ethan's expression shifted. Confusion gave way to recognition, then panic. He raised a hand as though trying to wave away the gravity of the moment. "Look," he began, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I can explain. Let's just sit down, okay? I'll make things right. I'll get you your money back." Maya didn't flinch. "You think I'm here for the money?" she asked, her voice low but unwavering. Ethan's smile faltered. The room felt smaller as her words settled between them. He took a step back, but there was nowhere left to run. But Maya wasn't there for the money. She was there to take back her dignity, and she believed there was only one way to do that. The morning air was still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. For a moment, there was only silence, two people standing face to face, their shared history written in betrayal and loss. Then, the silence was shattered. The crack of a single gunshot echoed across the quiet beachside, sharp and unforgiving. Birds scattered from the treetops. The sound rippled out, as though the universe itself couldn't ignore what had just happened. Ethan Reeves staggered, his eyes wide in shock. His hands reached instinctively toward his chest, but it was too late. He collapsed to the floor, his life slipping away in the very place where he had basked in stolen luxury. Maya Lockhart stood frozen, the gun still in her trembling hands. Time seemed to slow as she stared at the man she had once trusted, now lying lifeless before her. She felt the weight of what she had done settle over her like an unbearable burden. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, as if trying to comprehend the path that had brought her to this moment, the pain, the loss, the betrayal, and now, the irreversible act. The distant hum of sirens began to grow louder, cutting through the stillness like a warning. Neighbors had heard the gunshot. Calls had been made. And before long, police cars arrived, their lights flashing red and blue against the pale morning sky. Maya didn't run. She didn't argue. When the officers reached her, she placed the gun on the ground and raised her shaking hands. In the days that followed, the story of Maya Lockhart and Ethan Reeves spread like wildfire. The courtroom was packed during her trial. Friends and family lined the benches, trying to capture every moment of what was quickly becoming one of the most polarizing cases in recent memory. Some people saw Maya as a hero, someone who had endured unspeakable cruelty and decided to fight back. To them, she wasn't just another victim. She was a woman who had taken back her power after being stripped of everything she had. Others saw her differently. They believed that, No matter how much pain Ethan had caused, taking a life was unforgivable. They called it cold-blooded murder, a tragic escalation of anger and grief. Throughout the trial, Maya sat quietly, her face calm but haunted. She didn't plead for sympathy, nor did she try to justify her actions in the way people expected. She told her story as it was, raw, painful, and unembellished. The world watched as the jury weighed justice against morality, and as Maya's fate hung in the balance, the question remained, when someone takes everything from you, how far is too far when you try to take it back? The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Maya Lockhart was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of shock and debate. Some felt justice had been served, while others saw the sentence as another betrayal, a system punishing someone who had already lost everything. As Maya was led away, she didn't cry. She didn't protest. She walked with her head held high, as though she had accepted the weight of what she had done long before the gavel struck. But outside the courtroom, the questions continued to echo. Was this justice? Or just a harsh reminder of what grief and betrayal can drive a person to do? Maya's story became a symbol of something larger than one tragic moment. It became a reflection of the hidden cost of scams, losses that go beyond dollars and cents. The betrayal of trust, the shattering of dreams, and the destruction of self-worth can leave scars deeper than any wound. Many of Ethan's victims came forward after Maya's trial, sharing their stories of how his lies had ruined their lives. Some had fallen into depression, unable to rebuild. Others lost their homes, their savings, and their sense of identity. For them, Maya wasn't just a criminal. She was the embodiment of the rage and helplessness they had felt, but never acted upon. But where does the line between victim and perpetrator blur? Was Maya simply someone who had reached her breaking point, a victim pushed to the edge? Or had she chosen to become something more, a vigilante who believed justice was hers to take? She was once seen as a victim of deception. Now, she's seen as a cautionary tale about what happens when you push someone too far. Maya's actions sparked conversations that lingered long after the headlines faded. Some say she deserved mercy, that her crime was born from pain, not malice. Others believe that the law must remain unyielding, regardless of circumstance. But no matter where one stands, one truth remains. There are people in this world who take advantage of the lonely and the vulnerable, preying on their desire for love and connection. And when trust is betrayed so deeply, the aftermath can be devastating, even deadly. Maya's story forced people to confront the reality of online manipulation and the devastating consequences of emotional betrayal. Emotional pain, some argued, could be just as destructive as physical violence. Trust, when broken, leaves scars that are invisible to the eye but linger in the soul. As Maya sat in her prison cell during those first few months, she was bombarded with letters. Some were from strangers offering words of solidarity and support, sharing their own stories of betrayal. Others were angry and condemning, accusing her of being a cold-blooded murderer who took the law into her own hands. But one letter stood out among the pile. It was from a woman named Claire. She had been another victim of Ethan's schemes, losing her entire savings and nearly her home. Her letter was short but powerful. Maya, you were braver than I ever could have been. What you did, I can't condone it, but I understand it. Thank you for making the world see what people like Ethan do to people like us. For once, they can't sweep this under the rug. Stay strong. Maya read that letter over and over, unsure whether it brought her comfort or weighed heavier on her conscience. She wasn't proud of what she had done, but she also didn't regret it. Ethan had taken so much from so many people. In her mind, she had stopped him from hurting anyone else. In the years that followed, Maya became a reluctant symbol of justice for victims of romance scams. Documentaries were made about her story, and journalists continued to dissect her actions. The debate over whether she was a victim or a vigilante remained fierce, splitting public opinion. Meanwhile, advocacy groups began using her story to shine a spotlight on the growing epidemic of online scams. Maya's face became a reminder of the hidden costs of these schemes, the emotional toll that often went unnoticed behind the staggering financial losses. Behind prison walls, Maya found purpose in speaking out. She joined programs to help educate others about the dangers of online scams. She wrote letters, articles, and eventually, a memoir. In her writing, she didn't excuse what she had done but sought to shed light on the manipulation and devastation that had pushed her to that point. Her memoir, Beneath the Glow of the Screen, My Story of Betrayal and Consequence, became a bestseller. Proceeds from the book were donated to organizations that supported victims of scams and fraud. Though confined by prison walls, Maya's voice reached far beyond them, touching lives and helping others recognize the warning signs she had missed. Years passed, and Maya's name began to fade from the headlines, replaced by news stories of heartbreak, scandal, and crime. But for those who had been touched by her story, her legacy endured as a complicated reminder of what happens when trust is weaponized and love is exploited. Maya Lockhart would remain behind bars for many more years, but her story had already escaped the confines of her cell. It lived on in conversations, in lessons learned, and in the ongoing fight to protect the vulnerable from those who prey upon their desire for connection. And as people continued to ask themselves the questions her story had raised, how far would I go if someone took everything from me? Where is the line between justice and revenge? Maya's name remained a symbol of both caution and resilience. In the end, Maya Lockhart became more than just a woman who took justice into her own hands. She became a question, one that still lingers in the hearts and minds of those who hear her story. What would you have done? As Maya settled into the rhythm of her life behind bars, she began to notice how her presence sparked conversations even among fellow inmates. Some viewed her with a mix of respect and fear, admiring her resolve but questioning her actions. Others kept their distance, perhaps unsure how to reconcile her crime with her clear intelligence and poise. Maya focused on using her time productively. She joined educational programs and volunteered to mentor younger inmates. Her memoir's success had brought her some unexpected attention, including letters from victims who shared their own stories of betrayal. Many wrote about how reading her account had helped them feel less alone, less ashamed. Among those letters, one caught Maya's attention more than the rest. It came from a woman named Celeste, who described being scammed by someone very much like Ethan. Celeste had lost her life savings and struggled with depression but had found strength through Maya's story. "You made me feel seen," Celeste wrote. "For the first time, I didn't feel like I was just stupid or gullible. I realized that what happened to me wasn't my fault." That letter stayed with Maya, and it inspired her to push for more. She worked with a legal team to create an advocacy initiative focused on educating people about online scams and providing support for victims. Through video calls and letters, Maya became an integral part of the organization, sharing her insights and helping to craft impactful campaigns. Meanwhile, on the outside, the conversation around online scams gained momentum. Advocacy groups and media outlets highlighted Maya's case, not to glorify her actions but to draw attention to the emotional devastation these schemes left behind. Documentaries and interviews with other victims painted a broader picture of the crisis, showing that the damage went far beyond financial loss. Maya's memoir was adapted into a limited series, sparking even more debate. The series portrayed her as a deeply flawed but empathetic figure, someone who had been pushed to her breaking point by a system that failed to protect people like her. Critics and audiences alike were divided, but one thing was clear: Maya's story had struck a nerve. The initiative she helped establish grew rapidly, attracting funding and attention. Workshops were held to teach people how to recognize red flags in online interactions. Support groups were formed for victims to share their stories and begin the process of healing. Slowly, the stigma around being scammed began to erode, replaced by a broader understanding of how these manipulations worked. As the years went by, Maya began to find a measure of peace. She didn't forgive herself entirely, but she came to terms with her actions. She understood that while her choice had been born of pain and desperation, it had also opened doors for conversations and change that might not have happened otherwise. When the possibility of parole finally came, Maya faced the parole board with the same quiet resolve she had carried throughout her trial. She spoke about the choices she had made, the consequences she had faced, and the work she had done to make amends. "I can never undo what I did," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying to make sure no one else has to go through what I did. Or what Ethan's victims did." Her words were met with silence, then quiet nods. Maya's release was both celebrated and condemned, much like her actions had been. But she emerged from prison with a renewed sense of purpose. She continued her advocacy work, speaking at events, consulting with organizations, and writing more about the complex emotions surrounding betrayal, justice, and forgiveness. Though her freedom was hard-won and her past remained a shadow, Maya Lockhart used her story to shine a light on the darker corners of human vulnerability. In doing so, she became more than a cautionary tale. She became a voice for those who had been silenced, a beacon for those searching for a way forward after loss. And through it all, the questions her story raised endured, urging the world to confront the fragile balance between justice, revenge, and redemption. If you want to learn more and stay safe, stay tuned. In our next episode, we'll explore more real-life stories of betrayal, manipulation, and survival. Have you ever been through something similar? Share your experience in the comments. Your story could inspire and empower someone else. Trust is a powerful bond, but when it's broken, the wounds can last forever. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the complex worlds of trust, betrayal, and justice.